to log in and then we can start the meeting once you. Are you sure?
Yeah.
Right. Thank you. Good evening, everybody. Right, I've got the first bit to read. Welcome to tonight's meeting of the Overview and Scrutiny Board. The induction loop is now operative. Members and officers, please remember to switch microphones on and speak directly into the microphone and switch off again after speaking. Reporting officers using Teams, please switch cameras on when addressing the committee and switch off again after speaking. Please use the hands up icon to indicate questions and comments. The chair will invite you to speak. The meeting this evening will be live streamed to the public, and a recording of the meeting will be available on the Council's website within 24 hours of the meeting. Any exempt private items on the agenda for the live stream will cease prior to the meeting moving into private. There also might be a short delay. Is that any better?
Yeah.
You could hear that sort of the noise. Right, hang on, let me get organised. Yeah. Right. That's better. Everybody can hear me, can you?
Yes.
If not, I'll yell. Any apologies for absence?
Yes, Chair. Apologies received from councillors. Moore, and we've got Councillor Mead subbing for Councillor Moore, Javid and Nichols, Chair.
Minutes. Does everybody agree to the minutes? This evening, Mark, sorry, before I make this comment, have you contacted Ben? Angela, can you see him? What I was proposing, because Ben is a contractor, beg your pardon, a consultant, I was going to take that item first this evening.
Sorry, Chair, do you mind repeating that? Is there a hold up with an item that you were going to take before? First?
What I was proposing was taking Stockwood Park, that item 10 first, because we had a consultant who was joining us online. But if he's not here, Mark, I'll.
No, I think he's not.
Yeah. Right, thank you.
Chair, you might need to resend him the link.
It's there now.
Is it there? Oh. Yeah. Oh, we still need to do.
Oh, my apologies. Hang on. If I move my chair, does that help, Councillor Hussain, for sound? I've got to try and reach this one.
Yeah.
I can hear you loud and clearly from here.
Right, thanks. My apologies, I'm jumping the gun as usual. On the chair's update, the executive meeting on the 7th of 2022. The final report of the Scrutiny Waste Disposal Task and Finish Group, Executive agreed the recommendations. Waste Disposal Contract Procurement Options Report, the Executive agreed to all 3 recommendations. Update from the Exec Draft Electric Vehicle Charge Point Strategy 2022 to 2025. Executive approved the rollout of public EV charge points. Update draft local cycling and walking infrastructure plan. The draft local cycling and walking infrastructure plan was approved for public consultation. Disclosure of interests.
Not at this point, Chair.
Urgent business.
No urgent business, Chair.
Reference from committees and other bodies.
There are no references.
Right. I propose to take item 10. Ben,
Sorry. Some of interest, I just want to declare I'm a travel agent again, and we're going to discuss Luton Rising. It's agenda item 7.
right. Right. Any other interests? No. Right. Item 10. Ben, would you like to start presentation, please?
Yes, that's great. Thank you. I will just share. Let me find it. This one. Okay, so hopefully everyone can see that. So first of all, as an introduction, my name is Ben Shakespeare. I'm an associate landscape architect at LUC. LUC is a company of landscape architects, ecologists, planners, landscape managers, and we were appointed by Luton Council to carry out a master planning project looking at Stockwood Park. I understand that everyone has received this report, so I'm not going to go through it in too much detail. I'll just use it as a way to provide an overview of the work that we've completed on this project, and then I'll be able to answer any questions at the end. So basically, we've analysed the location of Stockwood Park, its transport infrastructure. This is the existing layout. So we spent some time on this plan, making sure that we understood the site and the surroundings, the types of planting and the various uses, and also the kind of lease boundaries as well. We quite early on noticed that there was a lack of accessible paths around and through the park. So really, it's only these yellow lines where you have these kind of tarmac paths that are actually really accessible to people. We also noted early on that a lot of the park is taken up by sports uses, particularly the golf course in yellow here, and the kind of football pitches and rugby pitches in green. Doesn't leave a lot of space for other uses. It was very interesting to research the history of Stockwood Park. It was previously a private estate, and this rather nice black and white aerial photo shows you the kind of designed landscape with a house set quite formally there and the lovely walled gardens next to it. The walled garden is still existing here, and you can see how all the other infrastructure has kind of been fiddled in around where the house was when that was previously demolished. So we've looked through the history and kind of presented a timeline here, which is quite interesting, just to sort of see exactly how the park evolved. When, like, for example, the golf course was created in 1972, and the Discovery Centre was opened in 1986, so all quite well established. Here we can see how Luton developed and started to surround the park, particularly from the 1950s onwards, a lot of housing was built, and you can see now it's completely surrounded on two sides, and of course there are new developments to the west as well. So we've reviewed the kind of importance of the historic buildings, including the grade 2 listed Stockwood House stable block, and the walled gardens themselves are also listed together with the glass houses, and you've got the improvement garden as well, also part of the grade 2 star listed park and garden. There are other historic features like the lawn path, the ice house, which would have looked similar to this, the pillbox, and also remnants of historic estate rail fencing along the boundary. We reviewed the site, the opportunities and constraints and the strengths and so on. There are still the sort of, like I say, the sort of remnants of the historic landscape, which make it quite interesting. The great formal gardens within the Discovery Centre, a range of attractive veteran trees, and of course you've got the Green Flag Award as well. The things let it down, sort of slight lack of maintenance in places. You've got the noise of the M1. You've got some quite large open spaces that aren't really made the most of. And I suppose you could have better signage and access in places. You have at least got some interesting features like the pond, and some interesting areas of longer grass developing, which make up some of the interesting habitats together with the dead wood on site, some quite nice mature woodland, some hedgerows, and also there was the Heathland Restoration Project, has been quite successful in places in diversifying the habitats. We carried out a full phase 1 habitat survey, which gives a good picture of the different types of habitat on site, and we kind of identified opportunities for enhancement of the ecology and further surveys that might have to be carried out before any works started on site. So we took all that kind of historical research to the initial stage 1 of the public consultation to present our findings and ask people what they would like to see more of at Stockwood Park. That survey was great. There were over 800 people completed, 941, sorry, people completed the first survey. This map here kind of gives an indication of their locations from around Luton. So obviously people travel to Stockwood Park. And from this analysis, we completed the initial master plan. Alongside the consultation, we met with many stakeholder groups, including the Culture Trust, the Bedfordshire Gardens Trust, Luton Friends of Parks and Green Space, Farley Big Local, Send and Epic Luton, heritage and archaeological groups. So from that, we presented the draft proposals, some images here to indicate those. We put together the draft master plan, and we took that out to the second stage of public consultation, which was carried out through this summer just gone. Here you can see the selection of consultation boards, which we had printed out, and they were available for everyone to view in the Discovery Centre, as well as viewing online via the Luton consultation portal. So again, this was a sort of successful consultation. I think over 500 people completed the questionnaires, and again you can see a good distribution of people from all over Luton, some of the surrounding towns, and yeah, we were quite happy with those results. Some of the questions we repeated from the first survey just to see if we were getting kind of consistent answers, and we found that yes, we were. The answers were very consistent. This is quite an important page. This lists out all of the proposals on the plans, and it gave people the opportunity to say, yes, I support that. No, I don't have an opinion on that, or I don't support that item. So you can see here from the green bars, everything was quite strongly supported. There were several comments made through the survey, so we analysed those in this section. The primary thing that people were not so positive about was the suggestion of having a sports pitch within the athletic centre running track. We can talk about that in a bit more detail, but overall there was strong support for the proposals. In this table, we analysed the demographic of the respondents compared to the previous survey and the Luton average. And you can see in general, we got a reasonable reflection of the Luton average population. From the results of this survey, we met as a project team to agree what changes we should make to the master plan. And then we updated that master plan, which you can see here in the finalised proposals section. And so these items are basically all numbered. There are proposal notes to explain what they are, and then some additional items which are not shown are listed out below. This master plan is currently being costed by our quantity surveyor, who will put together a cost plan, and then that'll just kind of give you a breakdown of all the individual elements. So when we're looking towards funding and construction, individual elements can be picked out and built separately. It doesn't necessarily all have to be built as a whole. These images give some ideas of how the proposals could look. So to give a quick overview of those, we've got the family cycling and walking routes, which we've proposed to go around the outside of the park, as well as linking up with the Discovery Centre and kind of meeting the main entrances, because at the moment some of the vehicle entrances don't actually have a path link to them. There was strong support for a new playground, and we actually proposed two options for the location of that, and the preferred option was the one here closer to Farley Hill, but on the plan we've left the alternative option, which is up here near Whitehall Avenue, just as an alternative option which could still be considered in the future. But I must just say that the Whitehall Avenue residents were less than enthusiastic about having a playground in the vicinity of their back gardens. So the Mooga, the multi-use games area, people would like to have one of these in Stockwood Park, particularly one that meets the, I think it's called Step 5 guidelines, and the Bedfordshire Athletics Association has said that they'd really like to be able to use this in Stockwood Park. And these are commonly located within the infield of an athletics track, but the current users of the athletic centre were a bit worried that perhaps having that here would mean that they lose the space for the field events, and they weren't sure about how it could be accessed safely. So I think further consultation, maybe some initial designs need to be drawn up for that area to kind of show how it could work. Maybe it's down to sort of timetabling and fencing and so on. So there was strong support for kind of picnic tables and benches, so that people can spend more time in the park, enjoy a walk and a sit down. They'd like an outdoor gym, some sort of BMX or pump track, which I've suggested could be located in the central car park just next to the rugby pitches. And there was also strong support for further ecological enhancements, such as the planting of new trees, enhancement of the existing pond, and more areas of meadow or longer grassland, which again is an important habitat for wildlife. I have outlined some possible funding streams for this project in the future. The one that I've commonly used on projects like this is the National Lottery Heritage Fund. But I understand that Wardown Park is currently in the process of applying for funding. So we'd unlikely get that at the same time. So that funding would probably only be available again to Luton a few years down the line. So that is basically it for now. As I say, the cost plan will follow on in the next couple of weeks. But I think that'll just be useful to look at when we get closer to having funding available, and we want to start making some of these improvements on site. So I'm happy to take any questions.
Yes, Councillor Franks.
Yeah, I've got a bit of a mixture of comments and questions. I hope you'll be okay with that, yeah. I think the first two things I want to say is I'm impressed with the plan. It looks very comprehensive, and I was also impressed with the consultation process, which was highly visible, unlike many of the consultations the council gets involved in. So whoever was responsible for that, I think, is the thank you, because it was a very visible. But I've got just a moan. I'm sorry, and I'll start with that. It's almost 2 years since we asked for this, and actually this isn't what we asked for. What we asked for was to have a look at the brief that was going to be given to the consultants, because as we know, the brief is a major influence on the outcome. So it would be good to know who approved the brief, although to be fair, I can't exactly criticise the outcome because it looks pretty good to me, but it would be good to know who approved the brief. That's question one.
Yes, please, Mark.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, members. I think I know most of you. For anyone who doesn't know me, I'm Mark Davey, the Council's Head of Estates. I've been working on this along with Steve Battlebury, who you'll know as your Head of Parks. I didn't know that was your request, Councillor Franks. Apologies to all of the group if that's what you wanted to see first. I'm glad it's worked out. I assume the brief was approved by Roger Kirk, but I can confirm that later to you directly, Councillor Franks, if you'd like me to.
Yes, please, that would be helpful, Mark. Thank you. I'm just interested in the process that it went through. Although, as I say, I'm not criticising the outcome because I'm quite impressed with it. So another couple of questions, please, if I can find them. Not too much because, as I say, I was impressed. Oh yeah, I can't read the page number. Still can't read it. Summary and next steps. Agreed changes. A Teams meeting was held on the 4th of November. I assume that's the Labour policy group. And that's where changes were agreed. Is that the case?
It wasn't the policy group, it was more like the project group. So the sort of parks team and so on.
Okay, thank you for that.
Yeah.
David, Mark, did you want to come in on that?
Yep, not sure which page, but I did have a meeting on the 4th, myself, head of parks, head of property. That's probably the meeting we're referring to.
Okay, thank you. The next bit, there's talk about changing the entrances, and are we entitled to assume that, recognising the dangers, you're going to ensure that none of the entrances connect up, so you've got through routes across the park?
Yeah,
thank you. That nod is quite sufficient. Thank you. And final question then is, when they're ready, could we please have a look at the cost plan?
Yes, I hope to have it in a few weeks. What do you want to do, Chair? Should I come back? Should I email it to the group?
Chair, the cost plan will have to go through.
That's what I thought. This is.
Could I make a suggestion that we take up Mark on his offer to email it? And if any of us think we really need a meeting to discuss it, then we'll ask for one.
Yeah, but it's got to go to FRG rather than OSB if it's costing.
No, I can't. I just don't see that. This is it's all too disconnected, isn't it?
Email it to us, Mark. Thank you. Sorry.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, let me make it very clear. I'm a Farley councillor, and Stafford Park is in Farley, and my two colleagues are South councillors, so we're neighbours. So we all three of us have a particular interest because it is within the two wards. So that's that part of it. In terms of the consultation, I think that it was very wide. People even, sort of some in terms of the golf course, people in America even responded to the consultation. So it's nice to know somebody knows us in somewhere another part of the continent. But more importantly, I think it is the long-term future of the park, because it is a park for the people of Luton, not just the two area wards. So I think long-term, I think what is being proposed seems reasonable, but it is finding the cost at the end of it, whether or not, but it'll be a long term. And I'm sure some of the 106 contribution, be that made from the airport as well as others in planning terms, that would be, I think most of it is deliverable in the long term, perhaps not in the short term. And I think it is because it is, one of our finest park in Luton that I myself, and I'm sure my colleagues will, speak for themselves in that, it would really appreciate, and the people of Farley, because sometimes we have the brilliant places right at our doorstep, and even people in Farley, don't visit Discovery Centre as often as they should. And I keep reminding the schools in Luton, you take the children on a coach to all sorts of places, but you don't bother, on your doorstep. And I think we ought to be advertising these things within Luton, which are absolutely fantastic, and we ought to be encouraging families and the children visiting those. So I myself am very pleased with what's been proposed, and I'm sure we can still, there's a lot encouraging as the idea of country park that I myself personally is very keen, so that more families can, and particularly during COVID, Chair, I've seen families, literally it was one of the few places where they can go and, spend time with their families and having picnic. So I would say that I think these heritages that we have on our doorstep, we ought to be encouraging people in Luton to spend some time in that. Thank you.
Councillor Javier, Hussein.
We got there in the end, Chair. That's the most important thing anyway. Firstly, thank you to the consultant for the report. Yes, Councillor Hussain is right. Yes, we are neighbours, but obviously, and I speak not only for myself, but also for the vast majority of local residents that live in South, who actually do make use of Stockwood Park and also are fully supportive of the golf course that's currently on there in the school. And golf is one of those sports that actually, helps a lot of other sports as well. So let's take, for instance, cricket. I mean, I'm a cricket fanatic, and there's a lot of young people out there who use golfing techniques to improve their, cricketing skills. And if one councillor, Aslam Khan, the deputy lead, was here, and he's an avid player of the sport, he'll completely agree with me. In terms of the consultation, it was a very good consultation. Obviously the results speak for themselves. There were a lot of people that obviously wanted to retain the golf course as well as make better use of our park, which is obviously here where I completely agree with Councillor Mahmood. Stockwood Park is one of our best parks and we need to utilise it as much as possible. So that is great. But the only question I had for Ben was that, do you think that actually, you were able to speak to all the stakeholders involved that actually use have an interest, I should say, in the park, other than the usual ones that you went to? Because there were some local community groups that consulted with me that said that they weren't given an opportunity to participate. But I guess that's just by the by now. But nevertheless, this is a very good piece of work, and it's it looks as though for the long term, as Councillor Hussain says, it will make best use of of a very important asset in one of our very important assets, I should say, in our town. But ultimately, it does obviously come down to costing. So we look forward to receiving the costing information. Thank you.
So I think we managed to reach kind of all the groups basically. We were provided with a list, and we kind of made the most of that list. And we also opened it up to kind of anyone who wanted to have a kind of face-to-face meeting, and particularly members of the Farley Big Local made the most of that. Some of the other groups, like the Friends of Open Space and Green Parks, that meeting wasn't so well attended. And also, I think we spoke to the rugby club, but more kind of from a sort of sports perspective, rather than an actual sort of parks perspective. But all those groups were kind of invited to the consultation, and I see that quite a few people, those people did take part in it as well.
Thank you for that. Really good to know.
Everybody bear with me, because I've got to really stretch to get to this microphone to switch it off and on tonight. Yes, Councillor Wynne.
Yes, I'd like to just support what's been said, because I think that the end result of the report is good. I was relieved, Ben, when you mentioned the concerns about the area in the centre of the athletics track. It's very much a debatable area because of the need for field sports and the difficulty of access. So I think that definitely needs a lot more attention, because just putting a sports facility in the centre of an athletics track, it looks attractive, but is actually very problematic when it's anything beyond field sports for athletics. Very supportive of all of the paths around the area, because to me, that's been the biggest difficulty when you actually go around Stockwood Park, because most of it, you're okay if the weather's good and you've got some decent walking shoes on, but otherwise most of the park is inaccessible to people. Yeah. So all in all, I support the work that's been done. And I think, like everybody else, I just want to know, how much is it going to cost and where does the money come from? Because I'd like to see it moving on now.
Councillor Mead.
Thank you, Chair. I think the only thing what's missing for me is something there which gives a wow factor, a central focal point, which people can say and see and say, crikey, look at that, yes. And it sort of gives a focal point to the whole park. Now, you're going to ask me, well, what do I think we should do? I don't know. But I'm sure there could be something, I don't know, we'll have a really good BMX track, a skateboarding track or whatever they're called, something where we can have regional competitions and seating and that sort of thing. Something a bit special, a bit out of the ordinary to put in the park to give it some sort of focus. Thank you.
Yeah, I think the problem with a sort of dedicated wow factor like that is that it's difficult to please everyone. In my eyes, the wow factor should be the setting, the kind of setting of the historic landscape, really. That's what makes this unique. This is what kind of lifts it above any other kind of public park that has some facilities in it. I'd like people to really enjoy coming there as a day out, and they just think, wow, look at these trees, look at this, look at these views. So it's, I mean, it's obviously a great shame that the house isn't there anymore. But I think more could be made of the stable block and the kind of some of the nice sort of brickwork and so on you've got there. So actually by arranging some of these paths to sort of bring people around and see these key views will help to give a bit of a wow factor.
Councillor Ackley.
Chair, thank you. Just a comment. In terms of the report, I think it's spot on, and I think the park is an asset for the town, and most people, especially during the COVID, made great use of it. And I know from the Ghanaian community, they do frequent the place, take their children there to go and have recreational activities. So I think we should try and keep this in the community and make sure that Luton has a place, as councillors have said, people to visit and promote. Thank you.
Any other questions? All I can say is I add my thanks, as well as from everybody else, about a really good report, very interesting to read, and the best of luck with the funding. Thank you both.
Thank you. Yes, well, I'll distribute the cost plan as soon as we have that through, and I'll keep in touch with Mark and the team to if I can be of any sort of further assistance going forwards.
Thank you.
Right. Well, good luck with the rest of the meeting.
Right, back to the beginning of the agenda. Item 7. Mark, oh, sorry, Councillor say. Oh.
Just about to be a pain, Chair. I'd like to declare an interest in relation to being a director of Luton Rising. And I also think that it's actually prudent if I actually left the room for this item, because my views may prejudice the outcome. Is that all right?
Yes, that's fine.
So if someone could just let me know and when to come back in.
Yes, we'll get somebody to come and get you.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, members. The purpose of this report is to seek your views on a recommendation that will be made to the Executive on the 9th of January regarding the future of Luton Rising's community funding. The reason for considering this report at the moment, or this proposal, are twofold. Firstly, our existing contract with Bedfordshire Luton Community Foundation for the administration of our funding comes to an end on the 31st of March 2024. And although that seems to be a long way away, now is the time to start thinking about what we're going to do from the 1st of April 2024. And the other is that we simply cannot continue as we have been with any hope of tackling the deep-seated problems that we have in this town. Basically, we have a problem of finite resources and infinite need, and we need to find a way of levelling the two. Well, why are the resources finite? Well, first of all, the money that goes into our community funding is derived from the concession fee that we are paid by London Luton Airport Operations Limited, and that, of course, is dependent on passenger numbers. And passenger numbers must, by their very nature, be finite. They're either limited by planning conditions or by the constraints of the airport site. There will reach a time when, if we are still dependent on that as the only source of funding, then it will stall. On the other hand, we know that the needs of Luton's people are great and are continuing to grow, particularly given the pressures that we're experiencing at the moment and have experienced over the last couple of years. So how do we bring more money into the town to support our stretched voluntary and community sector? That is the question the board of London Luton Airport Limited, trading as Luton Rising, has been considering over the last few months. And they've looked at the options, and the options are set out in the report before you. I won't go through them in detail. You can see them there. There are a range of options, none of which, apart from the one that we are recommending to executive, would go towards meeting that primary objective of bringing more resources into the town. So that is why we are proposing that Luton Rising should establish a charitable foundation capable of raising funds from outside the borough to bring in to help us meet our objectives and the objectives of Luton Council in relation to its vision for Luton 2040. We believe that it would make sense for that foundation to concentrate on strategy, policy, and fundraising, and for the administration of the funding to be carried out by a competent and qualified third party. So the proposal that we are putting to executive is to establish that foundation on that basis and to go out in due course to find a partner to administer the funding. The objective, as I say, is growth without growth. Growth in our social impact without being dependent on growth in airport passenger numbers. And our aim is to double or triple the amount of funding that we already provide to the community, which, as you know, over the last 20 years has exceeded £160 million pumped into Luton's voluntary and community sector. If we grasp the opportunities, then the rewards could be great, but it will require some investment, at least in the early stages, until we have begun the process of bringing in funds from outside. We need to make sure that the foundation is properly staffed so that it can do the job that it's been set up to do, and that will cost probably around about £200,000 per annum, which can be met from Luton Rising's free cash. A foundation bringing in additional monies into the town will enable us to do some things that we cannot now do for want of resources. For instance, we know that our voluntary and community sector needs support, especially those smaller organisations who struggle to make effective grant funding applications and need help to do it. One of the things that we could do is to fund or to support in some way the establishment of a community resource centre, providing advice and support to those organisations, providing support services such as preparing accounts. Some of the things that members will remember the old Voluntary Action Luton used to do, and very valuable services they were. We would also hope that that would encourage the growth of an organisation speaking on behalf of the voluntary sector in Luton to act as its advocate and voice. So we have quite a few aims with regard to setting up the charitable foundation, and we hope very much that you will make your views known to executive in a positive way with regard to this proposal. Chair, I'm ready for any questions.
Councillor Franks.
As far as I can see, Chair, there really is only one answer here, so we shouldn't be really needing to spend a huge amount of time on it. If you like, I will formally move that the executive be advised that we support option 5, the establishment of a charitable foundation, and strongly recommend that, as at present, the grants should be administered by a third party.
Chair, I support that because I think one of the things that I, over the year, had a concern is very small organizations who have very little skills of their own to be able to put the bids or to be able to set up that this would be something where, as I've said before, some of the areas probably are not able to access any funding, small grants, be that may, or anything else. So I think this would be an ideal thing for this independent organization, third-party organization to do. So I would strongly support that we do that, provided it's independent, and it does that encourage those small little groups within all of the town to be able to access the funding, because it seems to me that those that have the expertise seem to be taking most of the funding at the moment, and I think that isn't really what the benefit to the small organization who are left out. So I would strongly support that.
Councillor,
Thank you, Chair. I think Mark would know. I have spoken to him about small players within the town who find it difficult to access these funds, and I think this is more than welcome. And I think the little ones who are not able to write those bids or applications will really be happy that we are moving in this direction, and I think we should all support this. Thank you.
Does everybody also?
Yes, sorry, I just wanted to make a couple of comments. I think that it's the only option for us to go down out of those that are being proposed, and I think it's very welcome. My only reservation is that it's a bit like when you see announcements in the budget from our central government, the devil is in the detail. Because what I don't want to see is, I don't want to see this charitable foundation set up and to be hidden behind screens like most of the stuff to do with the airport is. I want to make sure that if there is a foundation set up, that it's visible, that people in the community can actually see what's happening and what's being done. And I know I don't want to make it sound antagonistic, but it is important because we don't have that sort of openness about some of the subjects where I think the community deserves the openness.
Any other questions? Does everybody agree to what Councillor Franks has proposed? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I'm obliged.
Thank you, Mark. Are you all right? Thanks. Oh, yeah. My arm's going to be sore by the end of this meeting to try to get to this microphone.
to submit to them a self-reflection report which covers the academic year that has just gone past. So the self-assessment report that you've seen actually covers the academic year from the 1st of August 2021 through to the 31st of July 2022. As you can see from the report, we did struggle a little bit with the COVID pandemic. We unfortunately were still socially distancing for the first 2 terms, which reduced the amount of learners that we could have in the classroom. We did transfer a lot of our delivery to online, but as you know, Luton residents do suffer from digital poverty, and that did make it difficult for people. So as soon as we could, we went back to full classroom delivery with 20 people in each class, which we have now done. So we have seen a bit of a dip in our learner numbers and in our achievement rates, but we're hoping that this year we are kind of back to normal in our centre in Arndale House, and we should see a rise in those rates again. But having said that, we still achieved really well, and against national figures, we were doing really, really well. So I'd like to take any questions. Thank you.
Any questions? No? The recommendation is that OSB endorse, sorry, I thought you said something. Endorse Adult Learning Services annual self-assessment report for submission to the executive, and to also support submission to and instruct officers to submit the report to Ofsted. That's a bit of a mouthful. Does everybody agree with that?
Yes, Chair, and I think we ought to record thanks for the report.
Thanks very much for a very interesting report.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, councillors. Thank you. Moving on to item 9. Vicky, are you doing the presentation?
No, it's Jennifer and Arthur.
Right.
Good evening, Chair and members. I am Jennifer Wyatt, one of the Neighbourhood Operations Managers. This is a joint report, and my colleague
Arshad Baksh, I look after the parking processing team.
So we'll be sharing the report. The purpose of the report is to outline littering legislation and provide an update on the current approaches to tackling littering, further to the introduction of the Council's 2-year anti-littering strategy, which was adopted in June 2021. The report focuses on 3 key areas: an update on the progress since the strategy, which is an overview of the actions that we've implemented in relation to raising awareness and prevention, a bespoke campaign, Hate Litter, Love Luton, the role of members and recognition for the community engagement. Enforcement provides a short overview of the response in terms of who is responsible for enforcing littering offences in Luton, and what the challenges are and what the team has achieved for the last 3 years. This work is not one-dimensional, and therefore it was important to include street cleansing and what they've been doing to address street litter and ensure that the council fulfils its statutory duty under Section 89 of the Environmental Protection Act 1990. I'm going to hand over to Arshad to talk to you about littering from vehicles.
Thank you, Jennifer. I'm expecting most of you would have seen the reports, and so I'm going to briefly cover the content in particular in relation to littering from vehicles. So in 2018, regulation was announced allowing local councils to enforce litter from vehicles in much the same way as civil parking penalties. So it relies on keeper liability as opposed to liability of the individual person. The team within parking and with some assistance from our CCTV colleagues have carried out feasibility studies to determine whether the adoption of these powers would be viable for our town. The studies have indicated that the costs for implementation and deployment of these strategies are considerably prohibitive, and we are actually recommending not to proceed at this time. We've carried out feasibility studies over a period of 2 weeks and identified a total of 6 contraventions. And as it states in the report, that's not to say that there are not more contraventions occurring, it's more that the ability to detect them using existing infrastructure is extremely difficult. Thank you.
And the third section is to consult you on the proposal for observable enforcement additional resources. The report seeks, as I've said, to consult on the proposal to potentially introduce additional resources to undertake enforcement on primarily littering offences and some public space protection offences. The proposal is to extend the Council's enforcement reach, working alongside the current neighbourhood enforcement team. The recommendations are that OSB note the content of the report. You are being asked to support the proposal to explore a short-term pilot contract with a specialist private sector contractor to deliver enforcement of observable enforcement for an initial period of 12 months with an option to extend if successful. And to formally recognise and thank the community groups and individuals for their excellent efforts in delivering prevention and awareness projects that support the anti-littering strategy. And it is important to note that this report relates to litter solely and does not provide any detail in relation to other waste enforcement. Happy to take any questions.
Any questions? Councillor Franks?
So where do we start? Paragraph 10 says the council receives relatively low numbers of complaints about litter. There's a good reason for that, and that is that the residents of the town have grown accustomed to the fact that there's lots and lots of litter, and the council's doing not very much about it. So it's hardly surprising you don't get very many complaints. As far as raising awareness in paragraph 11, I suggest you talk to some of my constituents because they're more than aware of the litter problem. They see it every day, every time they go out of their houses, and it's disgusting. There's a reference on page 39 to Sixth Form College. We are blessed in the area I represent on the council, and where I live, of course, with 2 further education colleges, both of which attract a huge amount of litter. As far as the Sixth Form College is concerned, there are 3,200 students, and a very, very small number are responsible for huge amounts of litter, particularly at lunchtime, including empty vodka bottles, I might add, which is rather worrying. But of course the council doesn't seem to be worried about that at all. They say they may talk to the Sixth Form College. Well, I've tried talking to the Sixth Form College and they're deaf. The truth is that most of the parents in our area quite openly say they would not send their children to Luton Sixth Form College. Sadly, it is only because of the behaviour of a very small number of the students. I mean, there are 7 litter bins around the college, most of which are pretty full by the time the council empties them on Tuesday morning. That tells me that most of the students use the bins. Sadly, there's a small number that don't. I've got a question, please, on the chart at paragraph 16, which tells us that over the years, take the current year if you like, 60 fixed penalty notices have not been paid, and yet there are only 28 pending legal cases. Could somebody explain to me why the number of legal cases is so small when the unpaid numbers are quite high?
Yes. That's because there are other disposals open to us, such as warnings and simple cautions and social justice out-of-court disposals. So whilst 28 have gone to legal, and also there will be an element of some of those 60 people might have moved on from the area and they're not pursuable.
Okay, could I ask another question? On page 31, there are no external costs anticipated. I assume that relates to the engagement of this outside contractor. How do you achieve that, please?
Through the...
Paragraph 31.
Yes, yeah. Through the procurement process, one of the key aims will be that there will be no costs attributable to the council towards a company providing that external enforcement. It has been written into the executive report that the only associated potential costs could be linked to legal resources associated with unpaid fixed penalty notices.
Thank you. I'd like to move formally that the OSB supports the recommendations 1, 2 and 3 in paragraph 4, and an additional recommendation that the executive should move as quickly as possible to adopting the littering from vehicles powers?
Yes, just a couple of things. That same table that's on page 40, what happened in 2021? Why is 2021 so out of kilter with the other 2 years that are quoted?
Yeah, substantial numbers of lower level, well, we issued fixed penalty notices for very low level deposits of waste, so anything that was at the time, the guidance was under one black sack. So, and obviously going through COVID, where people had dumped under that threshold, we used a fixed penalty for littering as a disposal. So that has distorted the numbers in that particular year. But that now isn't the situation going forward. Anything that is low level under one black sack that is fly tipped will be dealt with by way of a fly tipping fixed penalty.
Thank you. The only other question to me is you're saying that the third party, the specialist private sector contractor, will be at no cost to the council. If we tie that in, how many fixed penalty notices are you expecting them to issue? I sort of can't get my mind around the fact that this isn't going to cost money, and every enforcement of a fixed penalty notice would look as if it's going to be Newton Borough Council and not the contractor that has to process it through the court system. Is that right?
Yes, we have to commit, in order for this to work, we have to commit to be robust in our pursuance of individuals who do not pay through the court. We have obviously, as part of our research, looked at other areas to see how contractors have, or how it's working elsewhere. And there is quite a high payment rate. So until all we can do is be resilient and robust in our procurement process to ensure that we do not underwrite any cost other than the pursuance through legal. How an external provider covers their costs won't be down to us as a council to determine, but I take on board your point in relation to if there's a high number going to court, does that by default? So we will factor in that we have exit clauses if at any point that looks likely.
Okay, just a supplementary on that then. How much is the fixed penalty fee?
We've got it set at the maximum, which is £150. We also have an early payment discount. Other authorities that operate that scheme don't offer an early payment discount. But we are committed to still giving our residents that opportunity because that is consistent with all the other fixed penalties, and we will make that clear through the process.
Okay, so if I just take the table at 16, 2022, number of penalties issued 99, at £75, that's roughly £7,500. You're not going to get much contractor work for £7,500.
Just like to comment on that, and that is the external provider will be focusing predominantly on issuing tickets for observable enforcement. Could be dog fouling, can be other offences for the PSPO. These have been issued by our staff and it's 10 to 15% of their role. So in that context, in other areas, they are, making a big difference with the number of fixed penalty notices they are able to issue.
Final one, Chair, and then I'll go, because I want to see something done to try and improve the littering position. But it would have helped me if I'd been able to see the number of fixed penalty notices you expected to be issued by the contractor, at what cost, because this isn't going to be a cheap process for a contractor. And at the moment, my initial feeling from this report is that it's not going to be viable for them commercially. That's my real worry.
Vicky, did you want to come in on that?
Only to say, I think that it's important to reiterate what Jennifer said. Our officers are doing a wide spectrum of different roles. So the amount of time they dedicate to littering enforcement is lower than perhaps what we might expect from a contractor who came in, who would in terms of what they'd be delivering for us in Luton, it would only be littering enforcement. So the amount of time they spent on it would be different to what we're talking about in terms of this report. And I think that another point I just wanted to draw attention to as well was of course, in terms of legal fees, when as cases go through the court process, we do of course seek to recover the costs of that legal process through surcharges and fines, etc. So that would be another sort of part of how this project would be kind of I use the term financed lightly, but so I think that just to make you aware of that point as well.
Thank you for that. I'm sure you've done the sums. It would have just helped me if I could actually see so that I could satisfy myself that it was viable, because my gut feel still says it's non-viable.
And I think that's probably why it's important to note that we've put this forward as a pilot, as Jennifer mentioned, for a contracting process so that we can test it. And what we've seen when we've looked at other areas is that they do sustain an approach in areas. If you look at other areas, they have been using these an external provider for a period of time. So I think we can have some confidence, we can draw some confidence from that there is, the opportunity there, if you like.
Thank you. Yes, let's give it a try.
Councillor Mahmood Hussain.
I'd just say for a start that I think I would support that the executive does, adopt this and does it as quickly, implement it as quickly as possible. But what I find it very sad in this case is that whenever we try to do something to improve the cleanliness or clearing of litter, we're always criticized, well, why haven't you done it? But if you come up with some ideas, and then the other sad comment is that we've got a fantastic institution, sixth form college, which has got a very good Ofsted, and we are not trying to promote it. Instead, we're having a right go at it. Oh, we send our children somewhere else. I would encourage every Lutonian to send their children to sixth form college. It's one of the best colleges in the whole of the county, and we are very proud of it. And the other thing that I would say is that in terms of improvement, when you are trying a pilot, the idea of the pilot is obvious that if it works, we will continue with it. If it doesn't work, then we will think of something else. And that is something that the administration is trying to do, is to improve, because yes, it is something that not only from the car, but in the town centre, people just throwing the chip bags out of their car. You only have to see in the evening, late night. There's not very much at the moment, nightlife at the moment, but when summertime, when there's a big crowd, there's a huge amount of litter that is thrown from the cars passing by. As soon as they've eaten, it's all into the street. And if we are trying to do something like that to prevent people doing that and give them a fixed penalty, I would 100% support that. But it needs to be monitored, that it is not excessive in a sense, where people would, sometime for minor offences, they have to pay £150. So I think that needs to be taken into account. But I would strongly support the pilot.
Can I just say, Councillor, if you won't mind me saying so, I'm entirely supporting what's being done here. My worry is that in practice, I haven't seen the figures that tell me that it is likely to be level in terms of cost to what we get back in terms of fines. Councillor Franks has already said and moved a motion which says that we are supporting this for it to go to exec and for it to go as quickly as possible. We're not in any way doing anything against this. I'm just concerned about the cost of the initial thing. I don't want it to end up costing Luton a pile of money through the pilot, that's all.
Councillor Malik, I've got a couple more.
Yeah, thank you. It's very good to have a strong enforcement policy, in terms of fly tipping and littering, because it's one of the main issue in our town. And, indeed, as we are doing door knocking and asking our constituents, and what are the, concerns, and this is one of the main concerns locally. So, in terms of this strong enforcement policy, I fully support this. And also, I support Keep Luton Tidy initiative. And I've been supporting this in the past as well, and we're still doing it. We're going to do our, we had this booked last week, I think, and because of the the early dark, we just moved a little bit down. In terms of this strategy, I just like to ask you this question. The businesses, shops, and takeaways, restaurants, they are the main reasons of this fly tipping and littering. And I always see most of the rubbish outside shops or even the takeaways and restaurants. But we don't have any strong policy against them. So how can we make them accountable in future to hold accountable to to make them clean their area at least 100 yards or 200 yards? So for sometimes people buy stuff and they throw their ribbons and their boxes outside their shops, but they don't even bother to pick them up. So how can we make them accountable in terms of this?
We've also raised the profile of the anti-littering strategy through the 2040 vision, and it's now on the portal, and businesses can have an option to support with signing up to Keep Britain Tidy, the agenda, the spring cleans that we do. And you'll see from the report, we only put a few headline bits in, but there is an updated delivery plan for the strategy, which if you would like me to send it, I'm quite happy to send that, and that puts a lot more detail around what progress we're making in relation to businesses, schools, and one of the elements I've mentioned in the report is we're scoping some additional type stickers that businesses can use, hate litter, love Luton, really start to raise the profile. Most of the shops actually in the town centre willingly took posters. You'll see some of the banners that are up and they've gone onto Dallow Road. So we're rolling that campaign out. But as I say, there is an updated delivery plan if you would like me to send that round that's got a lot more detail about what we've been doing and who we've engaged. And I personally have found the Sixth Form College to be now I've actually got new contact, to have been really receptive to some of the suggestions we've made about restorative and their students participating. They did make one point, might be worth me making, and that is that sometimes their students attract people from other areas who come and visit the area, and it isn't all students. I did acknowledge that nobody is actually saying it is all their students, and as Councillor Franks has said, the bins are generally overflowing. But coming back to your point about businesses, it is now on the pledge. There's some detailed opportunities for them, and there is an updated delivery plan around the anti-littering strategy, if you would like me to send that round.
So is there any short-term policy like I know businessman and the owner of the restaurant, they should know this already. That's it's not helping. But is there any short-term policy? We can just send them letters to ask them to, there are complaints. For example, I can give you the Carisbrook area, children land outside Downside Primary, and there is a business park outside the Downside Primary. There's a McDonald's there, KFC there. So we always find there, boxes, cans, and stuff. On those areas, and we receive complaints every day.
It hasn't helped us that there was a change in legislation. We used to be able to issue street litter control notices, and that very clearly defined a business's responsibility within, as you said, the meterage of their property, and to litter pick that area. That turned into community protection notices, and there's some ambiguity around the updated guidance. So at the moment we are seeking legal advice as to whether or not we can issue CPNs to businesses to make them more accountable for their immediate vicinity in relation to the litter that's created by their businesses. So we are looking at it.
Councillor Jabir Hussain.
Chair, I think this is, if I say this to residents in the South Ward, they'll say this should have been done yesterday. And I think, I'm not sure whether officers or those who patrol have been recently to Liverpool Street and Inkerman Street, Alma Street and areas. I mean, litter is a big, big problem. And if we want inward investment in this town, and if we don't get hang of this, there's not going to be investment. We are not going to have the prosperity. And I think this needs to be taken very seriously. It's welcome. But in terms of my question, on page 40, it says, visible patrolling also provides a deterrent and preventative effect. I think our residents will say they want to see a zero tolerance to litter in this town. No, if you have visible patrolling, how many people patrol, let's say, South Ward? Can you tell me the numbers? And going forward, how many do you envisage to patrol? Because it's not enough. We need to do more than what we're doing. That's what the residents tell us. Councillor Javiria will tell you. We went only last weekend, and every resident just points to the street and say, what are you doing about this? Even some went to the extent of asking, is it election time? And we said, no, as we come here every year, it's not election. Election is next year. We want to make sure that this town is clean to have investment. Please, can you tell me, how many do you have now? How many do you envisage? And how are we going to assess this? It's overdue, and we will support it. So please, can you tell me, how many do you have patrolling, even the town center, let alone the whole town wide? And what do you envisage that, how many deterrent patrolling, visible personnel are we going to see? Thank you.
The team are relatively small, so there's 9 uniformed enforcement officers, and they've been operating at about 50%. They also have to deal with abandoned and unlicensed vehicles and lots of other elements to their role, fly tipping as well. So they're not just focused on littering. For the town centre, we maintain 2 officers all day, every day. This proposal would see more staff and also them working Sundays. With regards to patrolling, our officers are predominantly reactive to complaints and dealing with incidents as they've happened. And an element of that is a visible patrol. But there are 2 vans, 2 vehicles that cover the whole of the borough. But as I say, They've been operating at about 50%. So that doesn't give you much coverage.
Yeah, I think it's important just to say that we are still carrying some vacancies, and whilst we have seen a slight increase in applications for the role, and James and the team have offered posts out, we are still carrying vacancies at the moment. So it is as Jennifer said, there's six officers at the moment, for 2 that cover the town centre and 4 that cover the remainder of the town. So the additionality that the external contractor would bring would help what you're talking about in terms of extending the reach and the visit, the reach of officers to be patrolling in wider areas more frequently.
When you talk about 2 personnel looking after the whole town centre, this is an impossible task to achieve. If you want to stop littering, I think we need to invest more than just 2 personnel within the centre. I live here. I want people to come and enjoy and invest here. And if we want to stop the littering, we have to employ more people to be able to enforce this. I think it should be self-recovery. Is there a reason why we are not getting people to take up this post to do the enforcement? Is there a reason why we can't employ more than 9 people for the whole town? South Ward alone, I think you require more than 50 people if you want to get on top of this.
Well, we could employ, based on the resources that are allocated to, to the posts, to this team. What I would say is the reason that we have a lot of turnover is, in a way, a slight positive, because these are roles that are building blocks for people to take on other jobs. So actually what we've seen is a lot of progression. So the reason we see vacancies is because people have moved on to, we've had, I think, people join the police and other parts of the so that's why we see vacancies in these roles. And we are always seeking to fill the roles to establishment, but we can't, if people move on to other roles, we do remain in a recruitment circle that we have to, contest with.
I'm not sure that I'm satisfied with the answer, but I think we need to do more than what we are doing if we want to attract investment and for people in this town to feel proud of what's happening with litter. I know you're doing your best, but I think we need more than what we're doing, and you should get more staff so that you can recover your calls. There should be 0 tolerance, as the residents have been telling us. Until you do that, it makes it difficult for us to be champions of the town, because when we go and talk to residents, they just laugh at us and we're doing something about it. And I think this is a good start, but I think you need to do more than that. Thank you, Chair.
But Councillor Agbury, they can only do that with the staff that they have and the budget that they have.
What I'm saying is you can employ more people. I can
appreciate what you're saying,
to recover costs. And the only way you do that is to make sure there is 0 tolerance and there are people enforcing it. And people are being taken to court to make sure that this is paid and chase people to pay these fines. If we don't do this, nothing is going to change. That's what the residents are telling us when we go on our walks. That's from residents. They want 0 tolerance. Thank you, Chair.
Jabira Hussain, did you want to say anything? Because your name is down, but Councillor
I was
Agbury...
looking at you. No, I should be as quick as I can. Well, firstly, thank you very much, officers, for your report. I take on board the obviously ongoing issue around resources and obviously appointment, and the officer there is absolutely right. It's seen, most of these jobs are seen as a stepping stone into something, a step up the ladder, I should say. So obviously we are continuing in that cycle of employment. You're absolutely right on that. And obviously, there are vacancies which need to get filled. Yeah, and I do see them out there. I had 1 or 2 questions. I was just hoping if they can get quickly answered. On page 16, the table that's been provided, Any chance we could perhaps have a breakdown of which locations they were issued in respect of? So these are the penalty notices. If that's not impossible, because I think it'll probably be a good idea for OSB to see which areas these relate to, and if there is a trend there, that will be extremely helpful. Second of all, I do welcome the initiatives, especially taken by local community groups, such as Luton Bid, ABCD in Luton, Good Jib Luton, also the local schools and Love Luton, etc., taking an active interest in trying to keep, Luton tidy, and that's important. And I think one of the biggest messages is the educational aspect to our residents as well. Telling them, it's really important that they take pride in their neighbourhoods, in their streets, and so on. But it is, it's a challenge, and it is the number one issue that residents want dealt with, which is antisocial behaviour, dealing with litter picking, and obviously dealing with related issues around that. And then the other thing is that I for one have actually seen an improvement, and I do welcome the initiative taken by officers of deep cleansing once a week on hotspots. For instance, in Dallow and South Ward, I've actually seen improvements on that, so I think that is very, very welcomed. And then in terms of the pilot, is the intention that once the 12-month pilot is over, that a report will come back to OSB with the results and what the findings are?
Yes, part of the procurement exercise will obviously determine what success looks like and what would be our threshold in terms of engagement going forward. So it would probably be around the 9-month mark that we will know if we want to pursue and continue, unless anything has happened prior to that that might say there's been increased legal costs, which I'm very mindful of. But excluding that, I think it would be around the 9-month mark, so that we would then have continuation as opposed to wait till 12.
Excellent. And then obviously, I think you obviously mentioned the delivery strategy, which I think fellow colleagues have already mentioned. I mean, I'd like to see a copy of that, because that would be very useful. But if we could have a breakdown of that table as to which locations the penalty charges were issued in respect of, then that will be useful, I think. Thank you.
Councillor Franks.
A number of points. I do understand the desire to have a breakdown of the areas where these fixed penalty notices have been issued. I fear it won't actually give us too much useful information. For example, Barnfield Ward is going to have a 0. That doesn't mean it hasn't got a litter problem. It simply means the council's enforcement officers haven't been enforcing it. There was reference made to the bins overflowing. I think it was Jennifer that made that point. As far as the further education colleges and the litter bins around them are concerned, they're not overflowing. I absolutely do not criticise the bin emptying teams. They do an excellent job. The bins are emptied every week, and at the time they come round, usually on Tuesday morning, the bins are nearly full. But no criticism of the bin emptying team at all. They do an excellent job. I do think Councillor Agbley needs to be reminded why the situation is as bad as it is. And it's because his Labour Council cut the number of street cleaners by almost 50%, cut the budget for enforcement, and I'm sorry, but you do not get better services by cutting the budgets and sacking half of the street cleaners. So I think it's appropriate for me to remind you of what I've moved. I moved that OSB advise executive that they support the recommendations in paragraph 4. I would add an additional recommendation that executive be asked to move as fast as possible to adopt the littering from vehicles powers. And again, taking Javira's suggestion, I would add a further one, that a report comes back to OSB at an appropriate time before the end of the 12-month contract.
No. Councillor Hussain put his hand up. I will accept one of you to answer.
Chair, he mentioned my name. I need to respond.
Councillor Hussain, do you wish to respond first and then Councillor Radcliffe?
I do want to respond to a particular thing, Chair. I do want to respond to a particular thing that was mentioned in terms of the cuts. May I remind this members here that when we agreed to put extra £2 million into the cleansing, your group, you asked them to vote against it. So you mustn't forget that. That was you and your group that voted against it.
I think we have to be careful when we come here and try and play politics with what's happening in the town. When you talk about Labour cards, this is not Labour cards. I think people have short memories about the condemned government who started the cuts. It's through the Liberal Democrats and the Tory government that has cut what comes to this council. The OSB is supposed to be non-partisan and making sure that we look at what is going to executive. For people to turn this into party politics, I think it's a big, big shame. You know how much this council was receiving before from 2010. It is the plan of the Conservatives and the Liberal Democrats, of which you are a member, who coined the phrase to cut and cut and cut. So please, I don't need somebody to lecture us as a Labour group about cutting. We have not cut. We made sure that this town has survived despite the condemned government's proposal to cut and cut and cut. Thank you, Chair.
Top. Yes. I don't want this going political anymore. I think both sides have said sufficient. But one sentence.
One sentence. I'll try and do it in paraphrasing.
No.
Yeah, I just want to say this. There's only two ways that you can change littering in the town. One is you change it by enforcement or you change it by attitude. The reason we have a massive littering problem is that because huge amount of people don't care. That's reality. And I live on Old Bedford Road. I go home every day and pick up litter that's been chucked in my garden by people going to sixth form college every day. And they don't care. In the past, people did care. And people cared because the whole of the society cared. The head teachers cared, the churches cared, the people in their streets cared. In Hungary, they have a spring clean day, every year. It's a public holiday. And you have to go out and clean your own garden, the front of your garden, the front of your shop. Everybody in the country does it once a year. It's about attitudes. And the problem is that you either do it by attitudes, and I think to do that we have to say, should the schools all be out cleaning? Should all the kids be going out half a day a year? Because it then means enforcement. That's one way you can do it. Or you do it by physical enforcement. And if you do it by physical enforcement and penalties, I'll be honest, 9 people is going to make no difference at all to a town the size of Luton. Absolutely no. And we are just really something in the wind. If we think that's going to change, and we'll all be knocking on doors and everybody will be saying to us, this town is filthy. That is reality. I feel, in lots of ways, probably the only way we'll ever deal with it is we ever deal with the first one, unless we get massive resources. And we should have a massive campaign around head teachers, around community leaders, and have a day a year where the whole town's out cleaning it. But anyway, that's the point I wanted to make.
Thank you, Peter. Right. Does everybody agree with Councillor Frank's proposal? Can you repeat it again, David, so that everybody understands exactly what your proposal is, please?
That executive be advised that OSB fully supports the recommendations in paragraph 4 and further recommends that executive move as fast as possible to adopt the littering from vehicles powers, and further again that a report comes back to OSB at a suitable point before the temporary contract comes to an end.
Does everybody agree with that? Yeah. That's fine. Thank you. Thank you very much for your report. Right, move on to the OSB work programme. The only thing that I'd like to add is a new place brand for Luton, and that will be on the OSB agenda the 27th of February. And, oh, no. There is an extra OSB, and it, I couldn't remember whether this is for the 7th of December. Right. Thank you very much for everybody coming.